Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, or evening, depending on where you are. We'll just give it a few more seconds as people are filtering in. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. We'll get started now. Welcome. My name is Donna Marshall, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Charity Village. As we're gathering here on a virtual platform, it's important to acknowledge that each of us is joining this webinar from the ancestral or unceded lands of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people. As settlers on this land, I'd like to acknowledge that we are speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee peoples. For those who may be joining the Charity Village webinar for the first time, Charity Village is Canada's largest online job board for the nonprofit sector. In addition to our online job board, organizations can also post volunteer positions. So if you're looking for work or to recruit talent from the sector, Charity Village is a great place to start. We also have a ton of excellent resources for nonprofit professionals, including online courses, articles, fundraising tools, and free webinars like the one we're presenting today. Before we start today's webinar, I'd like to quickly run through some housekeeping items. You may have noticed when you joined the webinar that you were automatically put on mute. Since we have hundreds of participants in today's session, it's important for us to minimize the amount of background noise so that everyone can clearly hear the presentation. However, you can still ask questions and make comments using the question box at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. Look for that at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions as you think of them, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. You can also email your questions to webinars@charityvillage.com. If you happen to encounter any technical issues with the webinar, whether with viewing the presentation or with the audio, please let us know in the question box or by sending us an email. We'll do our best to get to any technical difficulties resolved as quickly as possible. But in a worst case scenario, please remember that we are recording today's webinar and we will send you the full recording by email tomorrow. So if you get called away or disconnected, you will still be able to view the full presentation. And with that, I'd like to welcome our presenter for today, Donna Marshall, the CEO and co-founder of Workright. Donna is a registered psychotherapist, thought leader, lecturer, curriculum developer, and writer specializing in mental health, harassment, psychological safety, and interpersonal skills training. Welcome, Donna.
Hi, thanks very much, Luigi, and nice to have everybody here today to talk about a really important piece of information regarding our responsibilities as nonprofit employers and how to implement those. We're partnering, Workright and Charity Village are partnering together to offer this webinar and to also offer the resources and training that are required by you. This partnership allows you to take advantage of Charity Village's an arrangement where we're providing Charity Village people, attendees, members with a not-for-profit rate for the training, and as well some special resources that you can have for free. So let's get started. So I understand there's a number of people here from across Canada, and I just want to speak to that for a moment. If you're a charity that's registered in the province of Ontario, you can use this training to train anyone in your area and province, because it then becomes your standard of training and how you want to manage training and harassment, violence, and the AODA, which we'll talk about, in your organization across Canada. So it actually exceeds the standards for legislation in other provinces, and I'll get to that in a moment. Each province has developed anti-harassment and accessibility legislation. It tends to be pretty similar, but there are some distinct differences. However, the baseline of the training in Ontario does exceed standards across the country. So we're going to look at the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Violence and Harassment in the Workplace, and accessibility legislation that is very comprehensive. And I've just mentioned you're meeting or surpassing provincial standards if you utilize the Ontario legislation. So we'll be speaking to it today, but you will be able to get resources that we're going to provide you that help you understand the differences in your province. So employers in Ontario and across Canada have significant obligations. Did you know that employers are required to ensure all staff and leaders are up to date on their compliance training by December 31st, 2023? And these pieces of legislation are the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and I'm going to refer to them as OHSA, Violence and Harassment in the Workplace. In brackets, I have Bill 168/132. Bill 168 was implemented in 2005. I'll quickly mention it in the presentation. And then a number of years later, it was amended to include Bill 132. And we'll talk about what those are. But many times if you're going to purchase OHSA violence and harassment training, you will have to purchase two different versions. You'll have to purchase Bill 168 and Bill 132. We put that together for you to make it seamless in terms of your training. Then we've got OHSA Health and Safety Awareness Training for both supervisors and employees. So we break it apart because supervisors have obligations that are the same as employees, but then the additional obligations of how to manage incidents if they occur in your workplace. And then we've got the Accessibilities for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which I'll refer to as AODA. So who needs to be trained in your organization? Everybody. Every employer has a legal duty to ensure everyone in their organization is fully trained and up to date on that training. So we're talking about all leaders, all new employees, and all employees who have not received compliance training in the past. And we like to look at a 2-year window on that because legislation is being tweaked and changed either significantly or in minor but meaningful ways. And so if we're checking in and doing the training and retraining every couple of years, we are picking up the latest in terms of that training. We also recommend, because especially in not-for-profits, I worked in not-for-profits for many, many years, and then I've done a lot of training across Canada and the US with regard to not-for-profits and some of the issues that they face. I've done investigations around harassment in the workplace. And there's a little gap that I think it's important for you to know about, and that is volunteers, contractors, and board members. Because when I went into not-for-profits, they would share with me that a lot of harassment actually took place from board members. Now, I'm hoping that's not the case with you, but it's not unheard of that board members use their power or misuse their power to influence or bully employees. For example, one large fundraising organization, they're fundraising for a lot of meaningful charitable things that they were doing. But a board member stated that he would not speak to anyone except, and he had a lot of money, except to the person who was in charge of that. And that happened to be a beautiful young woman. Smart, beautiful young woman. And then when he wanted to meet with her, he wanted to meet with her off-site, take her out for dinner. Well, you can only imagine how uncomfortable and afraid she was. So we need to really look at, how do we protect our volunteers? How do we protect and educate our contractors? I've heard of cases, I know of a company where I went in again, and they had a contractor who actually threatened, again, one of the staff members of the charity when they went on site with that contractor. So we've got to really look after our contractors, volunteers, and board members and bring them under that umbrella of compliance to the highest standards of safety, psychological safety, and physical safety in your workplace. And a workplace is considered also a mobile workplace. So if, let's say, someone has to ride in a vehicle to a meeting site, there have been cases of harassment or inappropriate behavior in those cars by people with power toward people who don't have power. And so we need everybody to know what the rules are. And employment or an employer means that wherever an individual is doing work on behalf of the charitable organization, that is considered the workplace. So we aren't required, but we have learned that the best way to protect yourself from litigation, from complaints, from safety issues is to really train everyone. And I've talked about the 2 years, so we can move to the next slide. So CharityVillage and Workright have been partners for a number of years. And Workright, we do a lot of training. The bulk of our training is around interpersonal issues in the workplace. So basically every issue you can think of in the workplace has an interpersonal component. Even if you're asking people to do work, how are we asking them to do it? How are we following up? Are we micromanaging? Are we being respectful? All of those things. So our training is around those relationships, and compliance is about relationships and creating physical and psychological safety. So Workright brings the highest quality of training at the best price point. We only have licensed professionals developing and presenting the training. Expert-led content presentation. So again, our training is all online, but it is not always done by a professional narrator, but mostly by the expert in that field. And then we have a lot of downloadable resources that you can use. So our compliance training, if we just go back a sec, the compliance training package that we're offering with CharityVillage, can we get a link to that on the CharityVillage website, just so you're getting a sense of where that might be? I'm not sure, Luigi, what the best way is to do that. Maybe in the chat. I'm not technical, so I'm going to go on.
So they're on screen, and we'll pop it into the chat as well.
Right. Okay, perfect. So you, just to orient you to that, you just go on to that link, and then you'll be, you can take you through that seamlessly. Okay, thanks. Next slide. So something at Workright that we really value, and I think this is where we have our very close link and synergy with not-for-profits, is that we don't want to just provide the letter of the law. You have to do this, you can't do that, because the way that we actually move people to change is by helping them embrace the spirit of the law. And we don't do that by just giving information. We have to give information because compliance is very, it's law. So we do have to give those black and white, right and wrong pieces of information. That said, by giving this information, our goal is to create a safe and respectful workplace for everybody. And we all know, we've heard this quote many times, that people leave bad leaders, they don't leave their job. And the world's kind of in an upheaval right now in terms of work and jobs and hybrid and remote. And so employers are wanting good employees, and employees are definitely wanting employers who value a spirit of respect and inclusion in their workplace. I have a private practice as well at Forest Hill Center, and most of my clients are working adults, and many of my clients are experiencing harassment, bullying, cultures that are very difficult to work in, and are looking to leave. So it's really important that this spirit of the law permeates our charitable culture. So when we don't follow these laws, then we can create a toxic work environment. But again, we want to do it in a spirit of respect. There's a little quote you've probably heard that when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment, not the flower. So what can happen in harassment cases, for example, is that someone feels bullied or harassed by someone in the organization or outside. And if the organization will sometimes, in fact, in many cases, blame the person who reports instead of looking inward and saying, what do we have to do to shift the environment to make it more safe and respectful for people to work in? So really that environment is our responsibility as employers, and compliance training is part of that. So we like to say that our training is compliance with a human touch. So today we're going to go through, this is our outline for today. You've probably seen it if you signed up for the course. We're going to look at violence and harassment in the workplace. We're going to look at your requirements as an employer to respond to incidents of harassment and discrimination in the workplace. We're going to give you a brief explanation of the AODA, and it has many tiered requirements, so we're going to touch on those. And then some nonprofit specific scenarios and how to address them. The nonprofit sector tends to have its own unique culture. So we're just going to touch on some of those, which will probably be something that will resonate with you in terms of how you apply the legislation. And then we'll have a question and answer period. So let's start with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, OHSA, violence and harassment in the workplace. So in 2000, we can just wait for those to come up, if you don't mind, or they may have just come up. That's okay, thank you. So in 2005, a nurse in Windsor, Lori DuPont, she just graduated. She was excited to get a job at this Windsor hospital, and you can go back and look at the news on that at the time. And a doctor, the top doctor in the hospital, took an interest in her, and they started going out for a very brief time. But she became scared of him. He was doing a lot of things that were extremely concerning. So she broke up with him, and he wouldn't let her go. So he would hip check her into walls, and when they were crossing each other in the hospital corridors, he would make threats to her. He stalked her and her mother and her daughter, her little girl. He would show up at places. It was absolutely horrendous. And about a year into that, she reported to HR, she reported to other people in the organization, and nothing was done because he was a top doctor and she was just a new nurse. And I say just in quotes. And one day she had to get in early to the ICU, and he tracked her into the hospital, and he took a surgical knife and he stabbed her 7 times, and she died. And her mother, Barbara DuPont, pushed the Ontario government to add harassment and violence as hazards in every Ontario workplace. And it took her many years to actually do that. It was passed, and that became Bill 168. So that was an amendment to the existing Occupational Health and Safety Act, which was really just about mechanical and engineering things and chemicals and that sort of thing. Next point, please. So in your package of health and safety of compliance training, we do have the health and safety awareness training, which focuses on the physical hazards of the workplace. And then we also have the OHSA amendment on top of that adds the psychological component, which is the harassment piece, which is also part of violence, which crosses over, that's physical, but it's also threats. And we explain that in the training. So then 10 years later, I believe, 10 years later, Ontario passed Bill 132, as part of their sexual violence and harassment action plan. And then that was folded in under the OHSA Bill 168. So the point of that, it's really interesting. Bill 168 didn't talk about sexual harassment or sexual violence. It talked only about harassment, which is also bullying. And so this amendment was to include sexual violence. And many of you may have heard of Jian Ghomeshi in the CBC. So there's he was harassing and sexually tracking women. He was quite famous at the time. It was my time frame, but those of you who are younger might want to look it up to Jian Ghomeshi. And the story there, it was quite horrible, actually. And so that's when Ontario passed Bill 132. So I just want to just pull back for a second and say, legislation isn't just created to make our lives difficult and something more that we have to do, even though that's how it can feel. These pieces of legislation are actually based on true incidents and tragedies that happen in the workplace. And so they are put in place to try and prevent those kinds of things from ever happening again. Workright's role in that, so Dr. Stephanie Bott, who's my business partner at Workright, and myself actually presented to the then Minister of Labor, Kevin Flynn, and his team on recommendations that we would make as Bill 132 was implemented. And many of those recommendations were taken into account to add an extra layer of protection. And I'll just point those out as we go through them. So Bill 132 amended the Occupational Health and Safety Act to include sexual harassment and violence as hazards to workplace safety. And then there are, with that, additional obligations by the employer in terms of how to address that. So the goal, as I've said a few times, is we want to ensure a culture of safety and respect. We know that's where people do their best work. And everybody, I think, has a hard go of it right now. So if they can be in a workplace where they feel safe and respected and included, not discriminated against, then they're going to be able to do their best work. This also actually contributes to the mental health of individuals in the workplace. So there is also that side benefit. We want to protect every worker from the risk of discrimination, violence, and harassment, including sexual harassment. Ensure that every worker is held equally accountable for their words, actions, and behavior. This is where it becomes tricky, because if people are in positions of power, they're often not held equally accountable. If they have been trained and understand that they are also obligated equally to follow the parameters of the legislation, we as employers have the opportunity to say, you've had the training, this is part of our culture, this is our code of conduct, and we have to take some action here under the law. Taking appropriate actions should workers not comply with best practices in civility, conduct, and regard for others. So here's what you're going to have to do, and you will learn all of this in our training. Our training is comprehensive, and we don't just tell you what to do, but we give you the tools to do it. So we say, where we say there's policies, measures, procedures, and programs, we actually give you the opportunity and resources to implement the legislation. So every Ontario workplace employer required to implement policies, measures, procedures, and programs to ensure the physical and psychological safety of all your workers. The health and safety awareness training, I just want to add here, you can get that free from the Ministry of Labor. So we have actually, when you purchase a package from CharityVillage of compliance training, we have added that for no cost so that you can keep all your compliance training, all your data around that in one place and to make it easier for you. Next slide. So your requirements to respond to incidents of harassment, including sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace. So everyone, so this, again, you're going to be looking at volunteers, contractors, board members, everyone, whether management or staff. So management and staff are required, but it's recommended that we also include these other groups, is equally responsible for sharing a workplace free from violence and harassment, including sexual harassment, in their workplace, whether remote, hybrid, or in person. And when we all went into lockdown, it's really interesting. There were actually increased incidents of harassment and sexual harassment when people were not in the office. And, it was thought that those would go down. They didn't go down. They actually went underground and were much harder to deal with. Locations of harassment can include in-person, virtual, on-site, or off-site. We're back in conferences and all those kinds of things, so they can happen anywhere. So to whom are you supposed to report? And I probably have supervisors, HR professionals, and other leaders on this course today. So you are all required to be able to take a report of harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination. Now, one thing that Workright added with the Ontario government legislation was to say, but what if the person doing the harassment is a leader? And often nonprofits are smaller organizations, not always, but sometimes. And therefore, who does a person go to report to if it's their leader that is harassing them? So we recommended that this be added to the legislation, and it has been, that the organization must provide a safe person or persons to report to if they do not feel safe reporting to the people that are designated for that. I was called in to do some consulting with a company where the HR director was actually the harasser. And so where did anybody go with that? Their staff or anyone? So that becomes a problem. So this addition to the legislation opens this up. So you will need to think about who would that third party be. Doesn't have to be a lawyer, but it needs to be someone who's trained to respond to this. Workright did, Dr. Bott and I developed the Harassment and Human Rights Education Advisory Response Team program, HART for short. And where we have a program where we can train members within the organization, a team like a first responder team, on how to take reports, what to do with them, what to say. All the reports are in there in fillable forms. So, reach out to CharityVillage if you're interested in that. And you can find it on Workright, training.workright.ca in terms of what you would learn from that package. Employer obligations regarding harassment. You must formally investigate all incidents and or reports of harassment, including sexual harassment. You must ensure that a neutral investigation takes place. And the problem, we had someone in our investigation team doing formal investigations who went into a not-for-profit. And there was one the not-for-profit really had its own kind of, without saying it, a political, I guess, bent. And most people in the organization did share those particular views. But there was an IT individual who came in, and this person didn't share those. And he said something which wasn't bad at all. He just shared his opinion in the lunchroom one day. And they sent him home and said he was being harassing. And then they called us and went, like, what do we do? And we came in and using the criterion required to determine that this individual was simply giving an opinion and was not harassing, was not down-putting, wasn't really anything. And if they had not done an independent investigation, this person had called their lawyer and was going to sue them. And as we know, as charities, our reputation is significantly important. And this would have gone public. So we also advised them on how they could handle it. And, it's really important. These things can spin out of control very quickly, especially with social media. So we need to handle these things in a very, very neutral, unbiased manner. We want to keep relevant employees informed of the process. So, whether you've been accused of harassment or whether you have, reported harassment, it's a very upsetting time. So often what I've heard time and time again in for-profit and not-for-profit is that the HR goes off to the side, does their investigation, and nobody hears about it again. So we want to keep people properly informed without breaking confidences, and that's part of our HEART program to help employers understand how to do that. So we're going to turn now to the AODA. So the OHSA falls under the Ministry of Labor. The AODA falls under another umbrella. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So the bottom point, the Accessibility Directorate of Ontario. It used to be Social Services. Now it's got its own directorate and is responsible for enforcing compliance with AODA, and can take and will take and is taking steps to ensure that businesses and organizations are following the law. And if you see that the goal is an accessible Ontario by 2025, there are a lot of marker points that have already been passed that organizations need to have met by now. So you will be trained on that in the AODA training from Workright and CharityVillage. Accessibility training applies to all public, private, and nonprofit sector organizations. The purpose is to develop, implement, and enforce mandatory accessibility standards across the province so that everyone feels respected and included. Next slide. So I want to keep coming back to this idea of going beyond our obligation, going beyond the legislation. I think as people who work in charitable organizations, we're drawn to that because we have a heart for people. We have a heart for making life better, whether it's through the environment, whether it's through, social services, whatever it might be. So I believe from what I've seen, we're a very caring group of people within the not-for-profit sector. So I think just coming back to that really the purpose of this is to also be helping and supporting the people we work with, as well as the population we serve. So some quick stats, 25% of Ontario's population live with a disability. 4.8% report a mental health or addiction disability. And I want to highlight that word report. These tend to be vastly underreported because there isn't a stigma, particularly if you've been in an accident and something has happened physically to you. We all understand that. We all empathize with that. But people are still very much afraid to report a mental health or addiction disability. Just from my interactions with individuals, I think it's highly underreported. 10.6% report other disabilities, including mobility, flexibility, and pain related. And people may not even tell you about that, but they may be struggling with it. Many people with disabilities are employed and entitled to a workplace culture free of discrimination, harassment, and violence. So the AODA sets 5 standards that are mandatory across Ontario. I've highlighted 2 of them because those are the ones that you absolutely must address. Some of them the other 3 may not relate to you. So we're looking at information and communication. You have to address that. Transportation, employment, design of public spaces, which is called built environment, and customer service standards. So let's say if you're buses, there's certain requirements that those kinds of industries, transportation, have to have in place. But if you aren't in that industry, it's unlikely that you would have to deal with that. That said, if you're transporting or helping people with disabilities go to an event, you need to find a way to do that for your employees. Employment, so we can't discriminate against people with disabilities. Design of built spaces, that wouldn't apply to you unless you were building a new building, and there are certain requirements for that. So we're going to move to the customer service standards, which all of you will have to have in place. So let's talk about those. Integrated customer service standard. So that means that these standards in the customer service, and you will learn all about them. And again, we're going to have a booklet, a guidebook for you that you will get as part of getting your compliance package from CharityVillage, that will actually take you through with the forms, with your plans, your policies, fillable forms, that will help you implement this very easily. So employers are required to, one, create, implement, and maintain inclusive customer service policies. So this booklet will tell you how to do that. You must welcome service animals and support persons into your organization if you have an actual building. You must maintain accessibility when accessible services are disrupted. So that's, for example, let's say you have an elevator, but the elevator has to be repaired. You need to be able to compensate for that for people with disabilities. And again, you would learn how to do that in the course. Train your staff to interact appropriately with customers who have disabilities, and use accessible equipment. I want to go back to 4. Workright developed our AODA training in partnership with Lions Club of Canada Dog Guides. And what a wonderful organization they are. I can't say enough about them. But a couple of their representatives, we videotape them, and we've got them giving demonstrations of what to say and what not to say and why, to help you actually understand, here's what I can do and not do, because we're often, oftentimes we don't know. We don't want to be cruel, or we don't want to be uncaring, but we simply don't know what to say and do. So we're providing you with those videos, and again, a wonderful organization. Next. So here we go. So the AODA course far exceeds basic training requirements. We have clear, understandable explanations of all the disabilities. So basic AODA training doesn't take you through it that much, and it may seem like a lot in one way, but in another way, everyone comes away on the same page, understanding the various disabilities and how to approach people with those. Instructional videos, dog guides, and scripts of what to say and not say, and more. This is the Helping Hands guidebook that we developed with the templates, plans, fillable forms, policies. You have to have communication on your website. We've written that out for you. You can just tweak it to customize it. Scripts and directions on how to implement the mandatory integrated customer service standard component of AODA in your organization. So quickly, I couldn't possibly cover all the nonprofit workplace scenarios and how to address them, but I have found some basic trends in the not-for-profit culture. I read an article in Harvard Business Review quite a few years ago, and they did a review of not-for-profits. And they found that these cultures tend to be passive-aggressive. And passive-aggressive means I say yes, and I do no. So I can appear to be very friendly and cooperative, and then I just forget or don't do what I need to do. I thought this was a cute little poster that captured passive-aggressive. Hi, honey. I closed a cabinet door just now and thought of you. Love, Steve. Okay, just say it, kind of bothers me when you leave those cupboard doors open. So three characteristics I've found is an expectation that we should always be nice, because really nice people do gravitate to charitable organizations. A fear of confrontation and rigid beliefs and judgments. So a very, right and wrong. Now, this may not be true for all, but I'm saying they tend to be a pattern in organizations. So we could talk about this at another time, but you might think about problems that you have in your organization and see if they fall under one of these three categories. The beauty of legislation is that even though there's an expectation that you be nice, and you can nicely deliver any message, it doesn't mean you can't be firm and hold people accountable to the standards outlined in these pieces of legislation. Fear of confrontation, the training also helps you with that, because once everybody has done it, you have records that it has been completed by everyone that you can show to the ministry or the directorate should you need to, and they are coming around and checking. Then you can say, now you took the training program, so you do know that A, B, and C, and that we can't allow that to happen in our organization because of this legislation, and because it's not the kind of conduct that we want, or it's not the kind of culture that we want to have. And it gives you a legitimate jumping off point to give helpful feedback and constructive support to people if there are violations to the legislation. And then with rigid beliefs and judgments, sometimes in not-for-profits, there's a tendency to be self-righteous. And I think it's a leveling field that says, in the end, we all have to follow these pieces of the law. So we can just set those aside right now. You may disagree with them, but they are things that we have to implement in our organization. So just a way to address these within a not-for-profit environment. So risks of non-compliance. Lack of evidence of certificates of compliance training puts employers at risk should a report of harassment, accessibility, discrimination, and health and safety violations be filed against them. And that doesn't have to be through a lawyer. That can go through an investigation with the Ministry of Labor. If people are not satisfied that their organization has protected them and has addressed these issues properly, then they can make a report to the Ministry of Labor, and the Ministry of Labor will come out and supervisors will assess your organization. Should an incident occur, the employer is not protected if you aren't compliant. We had a not-for-profit who took our heart training program and our compliance training program, and an employee filed a harassment complaint against one of the leaders and used a lawyer to do that. And the organization's lawyer looked at the program and the training and said, there is nothing that they can see here. You have gone above and beyond to address these issues. So it really does protect you, again, from reputational damage as well as from any litigation. People literally could be injured, and I know none of us here would ever want that to happen on our watch, and that's psychologically injured or physically injured. We've talked about lawsuits, reputational damage, which we all know leads to a lack, or can lead to a lack, of funding or donations. So training is less costly than litigation. Lawyers in employment law are charging basically $600 to $700 an hour. So it provides the basis for a psychologically and physically safe and respectful workplace and gives you peace of mind. Next slide. So we have a quick polling question for you here. Just pulling back a little bit. At this point, oops, it's just come in front of my screen. One sec. How many of you at this point have completed your OHSA and AODA training for 2023? So just a simple yes and no question. If you could take 1 second to just do that, we would really appreciate it. Let's just see where everybody's at. Because we're doing this, we decided to do this webinar earlier in December so that you did have time to get this rolling. Now, even if you don't implement it right away in 23, because we are running out of time there, if you purchase it, if anything were to happen, which we hope it wouldn't, you can tell the powers that be you have, purchased it and you will be rolling it out in the new year. And that's fine. So what I'm seeing right now, and this is fabulous, 46% of you have completed the training. And right now, 54% have not. And I know the question was asked in a way that actually makes it a little bit difficult to answer, because maybe some of you have done OHSA and not AODA or whatever. Putting those together didn't make it easy for you, but putting it all together, we're looking at about 46 yes and 54% no. Thanks for doing that. We appreciate it. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier this offer that we're making as partners with CharityVillage. The courses, if you purchase them individually, would be $65 per individual. But CV is offering a lower rate. We've partnered to offer you a lower rate through CharityVillage, which is $34 for the package of all 3 pieces of legislation. Within that, there are supervisor courses and employee courses. So it actually ends up being 5 courses. Of course, employees don't need to watch the leader program, leader course. So CharityVillage will help you understand that. We are also going to give you, if you purchase the package for your organization, free an e-copy of the Helping Hands Guidebook, providing you with everything you need to implement the customer service standard in your workplace. The value of that is $50. And a document comparing harassment training legislative requirements in each province for your reference. And that's a value of $30. Next slide. So register for OHSA and AODA compliance training for employees, and you can scan the QR code here. And then also leadership and supervisors scan that QR code. And then you have a graphic on the side of what you will see on CharityVillage's website, where you will be directed when you do that. So that's our seminar for today. I hope it's been helpful. I think we've got a few minutes now for questions. Is there anyone who would have a question? And I think I'm going to look to Luigi to provide those questions to me.
Yes, Donna, thank you. And we have quite a few questions.
Okay.
So I'll just get right into it. So first off, what if an organization is federally incorporated? Does OHSA/AODA apply?
That's a different piece of legislation. So you're going under a federal piece of harassment legislation.
Right. Now, could you please cover an organization's AODA responsibilities with regard to volunteers?
It's exactly the same thing as I spoke about with OHSA. So we don't have to, but it is in everyone's best interest to train volunteers.
Okay. Does the December 31st deadline for training/compliance also apply to nonprofits with less than 5 employees?
Yes, it does. Now, it didn't used to. That's where the legislation has changed. So any employer is required to.
All right. Now, we are an entirely virtual workplace. What are some of the specific and unique issues that we need to consider?
I think the one that I mentioned before is, how do we give people the ability to report in a safe manner? And that's something that I think is really important. Actually, the HEART program looks at that. First of all, do people feel safe to report? Is it a culture of psychological safety? If there's a bully in your organization, my guess is no, they don't feel safe to report. So I think it's important that maybe, like, one idea might be if someone made a presentation virtually that said, you know, we just want to remind everybody about this legislation. And we want to let you know that if you feel unsafe in any way, here's who you can report to, and here's how we will address those issues. Here's how we'll keep you safe during that process, which would mean, you know, not having someone, the person who's accused, let's say, threaten the person who made the report. I did an investigation in a small not-for-profit where one of the leaders was harassing. The HR did a fantastic job of saying, okay, we're going to do an investigation, a neutral one, which I went in to do. But in the meantime, to the alleged harasser, you cannot contact this person. They were serious allegations. You cannot contact this person. What did they do? They cut them off in the hallway when there was no one else there and threatened them to not take it any further. So these things can get complicated. So you need to be able to find a way to tell people and assure them that here's how we're going to keep you safe if you report. Here's how we're going to do a neutral investigation. And here's how we're going to provide our results, how we're going to, whether it's, you know, we do want to reform people if we can. And Workright does have a Leading with Respect online program that you can ask CharityVillage about, where we can train and reform people who are bullying or maybe don't even understand that they are. Soft skills certificate program too that CharityVillage offers. And so there's other resources we can give people before we say you're fired. So assure people, but tell them specifically how they can report and what you will do in response to that.
Okay. Now we have two questions, one regarding each piece of for each piece of legislation. The questions are essentially, how often should the training be reviewed, both for AODA and for OHSA? Annually, every 2 years, you know, how often?
So in our partnership with CharityVillage, like we review it annually, and then we make changes to the training that you would automatically receive. So you'll be getting the most up-to-date training from CharityVillage. But that said, probably every 2 years, as I mentioned before. Can you repeat the second part of that, Luigi? I forgot.
So essentially, yeah. So one question was the AODA customer service standard training should be reviewed by employees and volunteers how often? And another question is worker supervisor safety training required to be refreshed annually or every 2 years as per OHSA? So essentially for each piece of legislation, how often do employers and employees have to review the training?
Right. So as I mentioned before, so if it's new employees, they have to have the training. And we recommend every 2 years just because there can be changes in legislation. It's not a requirement, but AODA is making some changes. So I would say really keep your eye out for those. Again, our HEART manual, which you can just buy the HEART manual, you don't have to have the program. We've actually got the forms that you can fill out to just check off, were there incidents of harassment in our workplace last year, like that the organization itself can go through this checklist. And if you're seeing, like, there were incidents of report, we had 2 incidents of whatever it might be, discrimination or harassment or even health and safety, you know, injuries. To review it annually internally in your organization by the relevant leaders is actually very important, because you can keep track of where do we need to kind of focus, because we've had some problems here. So I'd say there's an internal piece, and then there's the external piece of requirements.
Okay. Now we have time for maybe 2 more. If an employee does not make a complaint, however, HR comes to know about an incident that has occurred where an employee felt unsafe, Does HR have an obligation to investigate?
Yes. Now, the other piece is there are formal complaints, informal complaints, and no complaints, but an incident has been observed, which is the one that you're talking about. You need to protect the person who you know it happened to. You also need to find a way that protects confidentiality to also raise the issue. So one way to do it, which is actually kind of a passive aggressive way, but you can't like out somebody who doesn't want to talk about it, is to do a training seminar. Say, so we just want to take everybody back around to to our issues of harassment, just as a refresher. And want to remind people that they will be safe if they report any incidents, and we are committed to a respectful, safe, discrimination-free workplace. So as long as you're getting your message out there, and then you can also tell people that they can make an informal report. So there's difference between the two. If I say, I just want to talk to you about something that may have happened, like I'm afraid to do it. People have a hard time, understandably, reporting these incidents, especially in a smaller organization. So you can say, okay, so you're saying you want to make an informal. You don't want me to follow through on anything. You just want to ask my advice on something. And if you can get them to surface that and feel safe with you, then you can tell them what would happen if we went formal. Now, if they're reporting something that is actually against the law. So sexual harassment is against the law. Sexual harassment, definitely. Then you can talk to them about saying, this is very serious. It breaks the law. You're at risk. We're extremely concerned for you. And we'd like to work with you to find a way that you can be safe and we can deal with this issue. And let's just talk about it.
All right, and then the last question, a couple of people asked this question. So it's around timelines. Do staff have to complete the training all at the same time? And what is the time period for new employees to take the trainings?
Okay, new employees need to do it essentially once they've been onboarded. Like it has to be done immediately without all your other onboarding and training. So I'd make it part of that process. Sorry, the second one?
Do other staff, not new employees, but do they have to complete the training all at the same time?
No, not necessarily. You can roll it out as you need to, as long as it's like you've got it, it's in your system, you have a plan for rolling it out, then that's fine. But I would recommend for your own safety and the safety of everyone that you do it as expeditiously as possible. But I understand it can be difficult. Now, this is online training, so it's actually very easy to roll out, and CharityVillage has a means of doing that and then supporting you in doing that.
All right. Thank you, Donna, for presenting such an informative webinar. Do you have any final comments before we sign off today?
Oh, no, just thank you very much and happy holidays to everyone.
All right. I just wanted to remind everyone that you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording. Please feel free to share this link with your colleagues. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar. You should see a survey link pop up right here in Zoom following the session as well. You can find more information on our past and upcoming webinars at charityvillage.com/webinars. On behalf of Charity Village, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you have a great afternoon.